do you do when you don't quite have the right amount of fabric for the pattern you really want to make? I want to share with you 4 different ways that you can stretch the yardage that you have in order to make it work for the pattern you're trying to make. So this is the situation that I'm in currently. I am trying to make the honey dress by Merchant & Mills in one of our virtual workshops here at the Workroom. And I got the last 2 meters of the green bobette cross stitch fabric. And it's 60 inches wide, but for this pattern to make the full length dress, I need 2.7 meters. And I thought I might be able to wiggle myself around it, and I almost gave up. I'm going to share with you 4 different ways, and the last one is the one that's saving me for this project. So the number 1 tip is to use a different layout than the one they suggest in the pattern. So firstly, most pattern companies will recommend folding your fabric perfectly in half and then laying your pieces on top of that. Anything that goes on the fold is on the fold. Anything that's floating in the middle is floating in the middle. But honestly, this is one of the most wasteful ways to cut your fabric, and you're just left with all of these weird, chunky leftover pieces. So my number 1 thing that I always do when I'm laying out fabric for a pattern is I will fold only as wide as I need for any pieces that are cut on the fold. So anything that's cut on the fold, I will measure how wide it is, and then I will cut. So for instance, for the honey dress, the main pieces that I was trying to cut out are the front and the back bodice, and those are cut out on the fold, and they are just under 20 inches wide. And so what I needed was not a 30-inch wide fold. I needed about a 20-inch wide fold. And then that leaves me a larger strip of fabric that's going to be much more useful. So unfortunately, because the challenge for this particular situation is 2 really long lengths of fabric, that still didn't solve my problem for this particular pattern. But a lot of times that is one of the best ways to save more fabric for the project that you're trying to work on. So the number 2 way is to cut single layer. Single layer cutting is definitely going to save you a lot of fabric because you will be able to bring your pattern pieces a lot closer together, but it is a little bit more work because you will then have to cut every piece one at a time, and you'll also have to remember to alternate the pieces that need to be left and right or that are not symmetrical. So you'll need to have a right sleeve and a left sleeve. You may need to have a left front and a right front. And so those are some of the things that you just need to be aware of if you're going to cut single layer. But single layer, you can always bring things a lot closer together than you can when you cut double layer. Again, that's still not going to help me with this particular pattern. And here is my 3rd tip for how you can save a little bit of fabric. So one of the things you can do is you can simply use a different fabric for any of the pieces that are not your main pieces. So anything that's not on the exterior could be done with another fabric, and that might save you a little bit of fabric. So for instance, on this dress, I could cut all of the inner facings from a different fabric. I definitely could cut my pocket pieces from a different fabric, and that would save me a bit of fabric. But again, not the thing that I needed for this particular situation. I needed some length, and there really wasn't, I thought, any way that I was going to get that length until I remembered the 4th tip. And the 4th tip actually was reminded to me by one of my students, Janine, who was like, why don't you try cutting it on the cross grain? And so the number 4 tip is to rotate your fabric and cut it a different way. Now, I'll show you exactly why this is going to work. Let's head up to the studio. Welcome to the studio, and let's get into the final trick for extending your yardage if you don't quite have enough for the pattern you want to make. So this is the one that's saving me on this pattern, and it is brilliant. I'm so ecstatic that one of my students brought it up because I had just put it out of my mind and I didn't even think about it. But I am cutting this pattern on the cross grain. And what that means is rather than going in the direction of the selvage, I have basically rotated the fabric 90 degrees. And so you'll see my selvages are, rather than being folded together, I've got my selvages actually on either side here, and then I'm folding sort of towards the selvages or on top of selvages. And because of that, I'm able to actually get 2 folds on this length of fabric. So if we think about it for a second, the yardage that I had was 2 meters, and the width of the fabric was about 58 inches. And so that 58 inches folded in half was limiting because I wasn't able to get the length that I needed. But because the yardage that I have is about 80 inches long, that gives me wider folds cutting on the cross grain. So I'm able to get these 2 folds and have my very long pieces that I couldn't fit stacked on this yardage side by side. And this is brilliant because now what's able to happen is I can fit my main pieces, and then I've got room at the bottom to put the bands, the bodice, the straps, all of those can go at the bottom. And I even have a little bit of room. I'm gonna add, I think, maybe 3 to 4 inches here at the very bottom because I really want it to be a very long ankle skimming dress. And I also would love to have sort of a nice deep hem. So I can get all of those things. I'm so excited. I am going to use some Liberty of London scraps for my pocket pieces, which I pretty much always do. That's a little bit of a fabric saver, and that's something that I pretty much always do. And then the other thing that I did is a bonus tip for saving a little bit of fabric is because the circumference of the dress, as I measured it, is about 80 inches, and that's a lot of yardage. That's a lot of fabric. And I knew that if I just folded out 1-inch fold off the center of the front and the back piece, I could eke out and reduce the width of the dress by about 4 inches and probably would never notice that. But what that's doing here is that's actually giving me a little runway of fabric in the center, and that's going to allow me to cut some of these longer pieces and give me just a little bit of extra fabric to sneak in some of those pieces that may or may not fit at the bottom. So I am using all the tricks I can for this, and I'm so happy to have been reminded that cutting on the cross grain, if your fabric allows it, if your pattern allows it, is such a great way to reorient and save a little bit of fabric. Let me know if this is something that you've ever done before, or if you have your own tricks for extending your yardage in order to make the pattern that you want. And I'll definitely come back and show you the final results of my Merchant & Mills honey dress cut on the cross grain. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next one.